So, good afternoon. Welcome. We'd like to welcome you to the interview with Allison Ochs. Allison, welcome today, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to go ahead and interview you. Allison has written an amazing, phenomenal book, Would I Have Sexted Back in the 80s? It's just come out. It has been getting rave reviews and has been available on Amazon, on the Dutchball.com, on the international sites. You've been traveling the world.
I have.
And you've taken us by surprise by a whirlwind storm. I read your book not too long ago, and I read it flat down in 3.5 hours, and I didn't put it down.
Thank you.
And I'll give you the compliment. I wish you would have written it 10 years ago. Because our kids are a little bit older right now and we could use them, but it still works, and now they want to read your book. So tell me, first of all, would I have sexted back in the 80s? Could you tell people what sexting means for people that don't know?
Well, I think there's a lot of confusion about the word sexting. Most people, when they hear the word sexting, they think of nudes. They think of images. They think of dick pics. And that's not exactly correct. Sexting is a little bit more complex than that. If you look in the dictionary, sexting is an image that is shared, not an image, a message that is shared electronically to flirt with somebody. And that can be an emoji. That can be a written message. And so that's why I've put it into 5 different levels of sexting. 5 levels are level 1, emoji, flirtatious remarks going back and forth. Level 2 is pictures fully dressed when you're flirting with someone, and girls seem to be quite the specialists at this. They will like crawl across their beds, look back at the camera, posing, you know, in like doorways and with playing with lighting to flirt with somebody. Tights of their jeans. Level 3, partially nude. I think of models, guy models with their jeans undone, ab shots, kind of low riding, girls in lingerie with their like nighties falling off. And then there's level 4, and that's when the nudity comes in. And level 5 is videos, FaceTime calls, Skype calls, anything with video images. So it's a little bit more complex than just saying it's a picture.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Wow, well, there's a lot that we're going to be talking about. But before we start talking about the book, can you tell me, who is Allison Ochs?
Oh, well, that is a complex thing to answer in a few moments. I am a mother of 3 wonderful children. I have a great husband. I am American and Swiss. I hold 2 passports. I was raised in Utah. And I am one of 11 children in a mixed racial family.
Wow.
So, and I'm a social worker.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. And speaking of your children and your husband, I know in the foreword you wrote an extremely sweet and personal, touching note. What did they think about this? Because this book comes out and now Mom's suddenly published, traveling the world, talking to everyone, maybe bringing in some personal stories about what's going on and what your experiences are.
Well, when I first said I was going to do this work, my son thought it was very embarrassing, the whole idea of me doing this and talking about sexting, and he was pretty horrified. You know, Mom, you can't do this. Like, Mom, no. Like, just no, don't do it. And we were driving. I remember when I told him we were driving down the freeway in Germany, the Autobahn. I was racing along, and he was locked into the car, so he couldn't get away from me. And I told him, and he actually really inspired me because he told me it was a stupid idea and it was a crazy idea. And I said, then, you know, why? And he said, nobody's going to believe you, that you're knowledgeable because you're too old. And he said, Mom, you're old. Oh. You know, you're just old.
Wow. And,
you know, he's kind of right about that. So I started thinking, and that's what got me to do a survey with young adults, 18 to 30-year-olds, because that's what he said, that was the age group he would believe, somebody who might have sent a sext. And to sit down and talk to them and get advice from them and listen to them. And that's actually how I came up with the 5 levels of sexting, was through this survey that I did. When I wrote the book, I had to pass all of the stories by my children. Anytime they were mentioned, they had to okay it. I did have to take something out that I wanted in there, because they were not okay with it. So that did happen as well. Yeah.
And was it something that was a secret until the book came out? Did your kids keep it a secret with the whole family? Did you tell not the whole family? You're one of 11 children. I mean, how did that come across? Was it a private project or?
I did tell all of my family members that I was doing this, that I was writing the book. I think that I didn't share the book with them before. My siblings, I didn't. With my children, I shared the story. With my siblings, I did not, but I did ask my mother to read it and okay it, because I felt that if it had her approval, it would be okay with all of my siblings.
That's great. That's a good little bridge, because in the book you talk about the golden rule and the grandma rule. Is there a mother's rule?
Well, I mean, there is actually a mother's rule, and I mean, you could say the golden rule, the grandma rule could be the mother's rule, but I think that putting that extra generational gap in and thinking of, could I stand in front of my grandma with her values and do this? And everybody's grandma is different. So, you know, let's say you're from Hollywood and your mom is a famous movie star and posts some extremely sexy pictures of herself, and her mom might be very flashy as well. They might have different rules than my mom had, who is from Mormon, Utah. And if I can stand in front of my family and say, I'm proud of this and I own it, I think that it's okay. And that's the question. All of us are different. So there's going to be different variations of what's okay. Mm-hmm. And I think that you need to think of that. How can I own that? And am I okay with what I'm putting out there?
It definitely comes across in your book, very personal view. You have great humor, sense of humor, which I thought was hilarious from the beginning. If you read the book in the beginning, it comes across as if you can see, and I know Allison, I've known her for a while, so you can see and you can hear her speak, but also we know exactly the situations you describe. We can all go back, which is what you talk about our own youth. The interesting thing the point you bring across, of course, your upbringing, you were raised Mormon.
Yes.
How does that come across? Because obviously you get, I think, a little bit of the cliche remark, how could you, of all people, write this book?
I actually think because I was raised Mormon and because I had a very, very strict, prudish upbringing. I mean, I wasn't even allowed to wear a bikini. I had to wear a one-piece bathing suit. Mm-hmm. So very strict upbringing.
Is that a bad thing?
No, actually, it's not a bad thing. But, just, very, very strict upbringing. And, I think that I've moved around the world and learned so much about differences, and I can deliver this in a humorous way and somehow scandalous, but somehow safe and pure at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I think it's that upbringing that helps me to do that. And I was presenting in India, and I was presenting to a group of women and men and parents. It was a huge auditorium. And I was a little bit nervous because I was in Mumbai, and I thought, wow, I don't know this culture. And I thought back to how I was raised and to be respectful and to understand those cultural differences. And it came across really well. And I was saying some rather scandalous things about what their kids might or might not be doing. They were very appreciative.
Very positive to hear. So I am now thinking that if you're giving a talk in India, is that how much do you prepare before you go ahead and start talking in every different country? Do you research all the cultural things, or is it something that you kind of take it, go with the flow?
No, I do research.
Okay.
I certainly do research. I always will have a conversation with the school ahead of time, asking the school what their school culture is, what kind of student body they have, what kind of parents they have. Mm-hmm. I talk about language. Sometimes I will show them my slide deck ahead of time and walk them through it on a Skype call to make sure that I'm, and I tell them, this could be offensive. I need your okay on this. So I will definitely clarify things. But before I even make that step with the school, I definitely will research online about the culture, try to watch a talk show or two. Definitely something like that. Interviews, cultural interviews. In India, I went on YouTube and watched interviews with teens and interviews about how they were perceiving online. I read newspapers, articles from the area.
So very interesting. So you're spending your time with the family between Amsterdam and Switzerland.
Yes.
And so we're talking two different cultures.
Yes.
Or maybe not. But how is the difference, and how were the reactions not only between the Netherlands and Switzerland, but between all the other countries? Are you hearing cultural differences whereby you're thinking, oh, this is typical European, these are American reactions? There are different rules and there are different ways of upbringing as far as, mobile phones. Now, I know we have both been raised internationally, and I know if I tell my friends here that my child laughs if I tell her to turn on her Find Your iPhone, because there's no way that we would do that here in Europe. Yet in the United States, it's very common to know where your children are and just track. How were the differences in reactions?
So it's mostly about that. It's about trust. So the big arguments and the differences in culture definitely come back to trust. There are some countries who believe, I trust my child.
Mm-hmm.
This is, I trust them to do the right thing, and I'm not going to have their password because I trust them, and I don't believe in that, and I'm not going to turn on Find My iPhone, or I'm not going to follow them on Snap apps, or I won't friend them on social media. And other cultures where they're like, oh no, that makes sense, and I absolutely am on it right away.
Mm-hmm.
And I do see a difference when it comes to that trust aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely see that in cultures, and I have to adjust my arguments slightly to try to get parents on board in countries where they believe heavily on letting their kids be free and completely trusting them.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever had in an audience, different nationalities whereby you feel that international difference, those laws, and how do you deal with that if you are maybe in smaller groups talking? Is that something you address, or you literally let it go with the flow?
I let it go with the flow. I take questions. I answer questions honestly. I don't want people criticizing me or disagreeing with me, because I don't think this is a black and white issue. I think there are many gray zones in there. I don't think every child is different, so you might have to deal differently from family to family.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm very open to somebody saying, but that doesn't work for me and this is why, and I'll listen to them and I'll say, okay, that makes sense. Well, what about this? And it's about having conversation. It's about having dialogue. It's coming up with rules that work for you. Mm-hmm. It's not my rules that have to work. It's rules that work for you, and that you feel comfortable talking to your child about these topics, and that they know that they can come to you if they get in trouble online.
Good. One big point, what you're mentioning right now, is communication.
Absolutely.
I think that absolutely, when I read the book, no matter how old your child is, the first thing I really wanted to do is plan another lunch or something with my daughter, because I thought, another place besides the dinner table or having lunch together, as you said, to sit down and talk and to see what's going on in their lives. And one of the other points you mentioned, which I like also, is the whole journey in the car. We can see it in front of us, whereby we have, the kids are in the back and have the phones on, and we're not even communicating, or we don't turn the phones off at the dinner tables. Yet I'm very surprised at how many people do let their children even have the phone on the dinner table.
There's a if you sit outside of an international school, or any school for that matter, where parents actually commute with their children and drive them to school, and you observe them in their car, just sit on the side of the road and observe at like stoplights, and as they're driving past taking their kids to school in the morning, you will notice in the cars where the kids have their phones out and are staring at the car, the parent is sitting there like and not looking happy, and the kids are like. And there's nothing happy about that. Everybody is zoned into their own device and not happy.
Yeah.
And if you look at a car where they're not on and the radio's on, sometimes you'll even see some dancing and laughing.
Rare, but...
Or even sometimes you'll just have a kid like tiredly looking out the window, But I almost rather have that and daydreaming.
Yep.
Than this, fixated look down at the screen on the way to school in the morning.
Agreed.
And sometimes listening to a song with somebody, not talking, is also really nice.
Recognizable, especially as you speak of in the book, whereby it brings back memories and you talk about, listen, this is what I used to listen to. You mentioned something, an 8-track cassette, and I forgot what it was. I had to look it up, even though it was one of the first things. For those of you that don't know what an 8-track is I mean, these days we listen to our music, on our phones and digitally and downloading. I mean, besides cassettes, for those of you who know what that is, the young ones looking and listening to us, is, almost like a square predecessor before a CD-ROM and a CD. Before that, we had 8-tracks. I mean, I won't even look it up, Google it, I would say. But the communication part is a big thing. That's the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, and that's in one of the chapters you talk about, now how iPhone has the new registering of how long you're on your phone. I actually checked, and I was dumbfounded because I checked. In 2 hours, I got 19 messages the other day. And I realized that, after, as you said, I decided to block some apps because it takes away your concentration, it takes away your communication if you're speaking to someone. What are the things that you would advise at one of those top 3 right now that you would say, listen, in order to, make sure that you leave that phone or are able to leave that phone on the table a little bit longer, like you mentioned, use this app or check to see what are some of the 3 things that you think these are great tips for you to stay away a little bit digitally and to encourage communication between your children?
Well, I think one of the most important things for me is that when you're spending time together as a family, that you actually put the phone away.
Yep.
Just put it away. Stick a time of the day where you say, we're going to all put these away for 2 hours. We're going to watch a movie together, and nobody's going to have their phone on. And the phones are going to go away for a while. So just actually putting them away for 2 hours in the evening would be probably you don't even need an app for that. Just put it in your handbag and put it on silent or turn it off. Okay,
so now I hear lots of people laughing and lots of parents laughing. Are you kidding me? How do I get my phone away from my child? 2 hours. I mean, I remember when we were talking the other day and I said to my daughter, I said, remember when you were little, I don't know if you remember, you had a star system. You get a sticker for, eating your vegetables, or I know it sounds crazy, but we did do that at one point. How do you get a phone away from a child, let alone an adult, for that time?
Actually, it's funny that you say, or let alone adult, because I think that in a lot of the presentations I give, they will say, well, I need to bring my husband in or my husband would never listen to you. And I actually had a man who came back to my session more than once. So I was at a school more than 1 year. And he's like, this is my 3rd time with you. And I know you're right, but I just can't. I can't. And I was like, yeah, you might have a little bit of a phone addiction problem, sir.
Role model.
But I think that if you sit down and have a conversation and say, this is why, I think telling your kids why you're doing something and explaining that to them and not giving an option. We're going to do this. We're going to watch a movie and we're not going to have our phones out now. And this is the way it is. And otherwise, you're not going to have your phone tonight at all. And it's going to go in my bag until tomorrow because I'm paying for this. I mean, it's actually pretty easy. If you just say, this is the way it is. There is no, I think this is a good idea. You'll say, we're going to do this, and this is why.
And so at what age are we going to start this?
Oh, well, the easiest thing is starting young and doing it properly from the get-go. So the first time they get a phone, you have to set up some clear rules about that, and you need to model that behavior. Meaning you can't be on your phone while you're watching a movie either. Because it's kind of a family issue sometimes. Everybody kind of has their phones next to them and will pick them up and look at them. So that's and I mean, I've done it before. I'm guilty.
Oh,
I mean, it's not, I'm not saying that I always do that and that I'm always, if I have one child out at an event and I feel that I need them to be connected, then yes, I might do that. But you also have stricter rules in movie theaters, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, honestly.
Should be off.
And
They're not really.
It's because it's disrespectful. So when kids are little and they get their first phones, you have to set up pretty strict rules with them right from the get-go at the very first moment. And actually then it becomes easier. And I find kids appreciate the rule,
Mhm.
and my kids will police us.
Mhm.
If I get my phone out, they'll tell me to put it away.
Oh, I remember that actually. Yes.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, they actually want to spend time with their parents without them looking at their phone. They think it's disrespectful if you pick up your phone when you're talking to them and give them a FUB, which is a phone snub, by
I
the
was
way.
going to say, explain that FUB, because that was new for me.
Just a FUB is a phone snub.
So what's a phone snub for the Europeans watching
So
this?
a snub is when you just kind of like walk off and ignore someone, and a phone snub is it's like when you are talking to somebody and all of a sudden they get a text message, and it would be like we're talking now, and I get a text message and I just kind of like look at it and I just kind of like start ignoring you, and you're telling me a story and I'm not listening to you anymore. That's a phone snub.
And it happens a lot.
It does.
I didn't know there was a word for it, but it happens tons of times, and it happens in business too.
It does.
It happens between grown-ups. I think, it surprises me that a lot of kids are on the phone and they're literally. I remember when we talked at home, and it was like I said for the first time, well, why don't you call the other person to tell, on your mobile phone, why don't you call her so you can tell her? I said, I'm not going to call her. I'm thinking, what's a phone for? But this generation doesn't even call anymore. Texts or, absolutely, doesn't communicate. I mean, how many times do we see parents at a dinner table or in a hotel or in a restaurant both on their phone? It surprises me.
Well, actually, this winter skiing, I saw it and I was so sad for the little girl, and it was,
it's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. You see it all the time, but it's constant. It's absolutely constant, and I think that it's all again about communication. So if you do need to get your phone out or have your phone out, you have to say, I'm really sorry. I need to get my phone out because I have a really important call coming in and I might need to step out for 2 seconds. And please, I'm so terribly sorry.
Yes.
And then you say, okay, I'm done now. I'm going to put my phone in my bag. I'm all yours. But, like communicating with people about that. I mean, how would it look if I were in this interview with you right now and I had my phone laying on the table and I kept on picking it up and going, oh, excuse me, just a second. No, you would never do that.
No, I don't think you do that.
No, you would never do that.
Speaking about what we're not going to do, we're going to go to a little bit of the darker side, because one of the big things that, when the kids were young, when I first realized it, and thank goodness we didn't have it with our daughter, but she spoke about someone who was getting bullied. It is the most, I don't even know how to describe it. When we first experienced it at school, in our case, it was someone who was getting bullied for being absolutely, it's a long story, but it's so personal that I'm even afraid to mention it. And that whole thing comes back because do you mention it to school? Do you talk to parents? What do you do if your child gets bullied? What do you do if your child is the bullier?
I do. It's a big issue for me, and it's something that is very personal for me as well, and I've had to deal with this on multiple levels in my life, and it's something that is very difficult. And I do think that one of the most important factors is communication and awareness about the situation. So the child who is bullied needs people to believe that this is really happening to them and that they are in pain. That's really important, that people hear their pain and understand it and don't say, well, it's your fault too. But it possibly is their fault too. But they need somebody to say, I understand how much you're hurting right now. And I think that if you're the parent of somebody who is being bullied, you need to communicate as soon as possible to the school that it is happening. You need to encourage the school to step up and communicate to the parents of the kids who are taking action. But at the same time, you need to have understanding that there's always something that caused this in dynamics. It's not your kid's fault, but there are 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, 5 personalities involved in this, and there are lots of different perspectives, and you need to work on how can we get past this, how can we move forward. And if you happen to be a parent and your child is accused of bullying, you need to listen, and you need to not attack the school. Number 1, do not say, my child would never. Every child is wonderful. Every child is great. Every child can be mean. Every human can be mean. And all of us have made mistakes before. I would doubt if I were in a room and ask, has anyone in here ever not, are you always kind? Have you always been kind 100% of the time your entire life? I don't think there is probably an individual that would feel comfortable standing up, because we grew up. And when we grow up, we deal with jealousy, we deal with fear, we deal with sadness. And kids who bully generally are dealing with insecurities, fear. They might be bullied themselves and are lashing out. And so it's only by kind of communicating and working together that you can solve the issue. And the biggest mistake I see being made is my child would never do that. Or I'm not going to talk to you about this. I refuse to talk to you about this because I don't want to talk about this because this is not happening. And just kind of denying it and pointing fingers rather than let's sit down and talk about this. And I know that not all people, it's a pity that ambulance is going by. Sorry
great
about
timing.
that, but great
Such
timing.
is life,
Because
such is life. Somebody's getting help.
Somebody's getting help. And that's what you need to do. You need to help people. And you need to come to their rescue. And I know it's not everybody's style to sit around and talk. And some people are like, well, I'm not a talker. Well, you still need to sit down and listen and try to understand and then to apologize. And I really would like to ask parents to understand that sometimes kids in a group will do things and they'll do one bad off here and one bad off here and one bad off there. And kids can be malicious online, and it's very sneaky and secretive. They embed it in messages. They don't like pictures on Instagram all of a sudden of one of their friends to show them, I don't like you. They don't comment on pictures anymore, or they start grammar policing somebody, correcting their grammar online and kind of humiliating them and poking fun at them. And a parent might look at that and say, well, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. They just, but yes, it can be a very big deal because you don't understand teen code. So you don't really understand what they're doing. And I think that is something that parents need to understand. And also that every school I go to, they all know how bad it is. And every person has seen somebody getting beaten up online. Every single person, every teen has seen it before. They all have to have been bystanders before, and they need conversations at home about what to do when they see it, how they feel about it, how to reach out and help someone, how to show kindness. And honestly, we as adults, we need to do that as well. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've seen mothers make some pretty snarky comments online.
Yes.
And in group chats, call one another out. And if you go on YouTube or you go onto a newspaper article, how many people start shooting arrows at each other, trolling each other, taking different stands? And we're not setting a good example for our kids when we do that.
You said it amazingly. I am 100% agreeing with you. The most important thing I think for this book is that it's not just for kids. It is for grown-ups, because grown-ups bully and grown-ups get bullied. And I think a lot of us in all different ages don't know enough about sexting, about texting, about what's going on in the digital world. You've really made a manual, and I commend you for it, because like I said, I wish you would have written it 10 years ago. For all of you who need guidelines, and for all of you who are curious about what's going on in that digital world, read it. I hope you write another book. I know it just came out, and I know you're being asked all over the world to go ahead and speak. It's a pleasure for me to have interviewed you. I'm sorry we could have talked for hours, but then again, you can on social media, and let people know what you think about it. I'll let Allison know what you think about it. Would I have sexted back in the 80s? Allison Ochs.
Thank you.